Okay, now we're going to factor by grouping. What does factoring by grouping mean? Well, factoring by grouping is what we do when we do our factoring by trial and error. If you look at this, how many terms do we have? 4. To factor by grouping, you group 2 of these terms together and take out their common factor, just like we do with our trial and error process. What do these 2 terms have in common? The first 2 terms, what do they have in common that I can factor out? How about x to the second power? You want to take out the highest power that they have in common. If I take out x squared, I'm dividing each of those by x squared. What do I have left? X plus 2. Now for these next 2 terms, do you see how this third term is negative? If that third term is negative, that indicates that I have to take out a negative number. What do those 2 guys have in common that I have to factor out? How about negative 36? We want to take out the greatest common factor. So negative 6 would work and negative 8 would work, but we want to take, actually negative 8 wouldn't work, but we want to take out the largest factor that would go into both of them. If I divide this by negative 36, what's left? X. And what's negative 72 divided by negative 36? Plus 2. I took out a negative. So a negative divided by a negative would be positive 2. Now what do these 2 have in common that I factor out? X plus 2. What goes in the other set of parentheses? X squared minus 36. Now in our factoring by grouping, if you look at this remaining, or this binomial here, this binomial is a special binomial. What is he called? A difference of 2 squares. He's a difference of 2 squares, which means he has to be factored into 2 binomials. So we have our x plus 2, and the difference of 2 squares, what's the square root of x squared? X and x. What's the square root of 36? 6 and 6. And what do my signs have to be? 1 plus and 1 minus. Now we factored that quadratic, well, it's not a quadratic, my bad, this fournomial into 3 factors. So it's factored completely. Now again, we have a fournomial, 4 terms. We want to factor by grouping. What do the first 2 terms have in common that we can factor out? A 2 and x to what power? X to the second power. We always want to factor out the largest degree that they have in common. If I take out 2x squared, what do I have left here? I took out the 2, I factored out the 2, so just x to the first power. Now if I divide this by 2x squared, what's left there? Minus 4. Antoine, for these next 2 terms, what do they have in common? 3. We take out a positive 3. If we divide each of these by positive 3, what do we have? X minus 4. What do these 2 terms now have in common? X minus 4. And what goes in my other parentheses? 2x squared plus 3. Can I factor this binomial out? No. We can only factor out difference of 2 squares, or sum or differences of cubes. And this is a sum of two squares, so it will not factor out. Any questions? Factoring by grouping. Is this the same problem? Yeah. Oops. This third example, we did these two already. This third example, we want to factor by grouping. We have a four-nomial. Factoring by grouping, what do the first two terms have in common that we factor out? X squared. If we take out an x squared or factor out an x squared, what do we have left? X minus 4. What do those two terms have in common we factor out? Nine. Do we want to factor out a positive 9 or a negative 9? A negative 9. Since this third term is negative, we want to take out a negative 9. By dividing both by negative 9, that will be positive x. And Rusin, this is where you got the 4 from. What's 36 divided by 9? Minus 4. We're dividing by negative 9. What do these two terms have in common to factor out? X minus 4. What goes in the other set of parentheses? X squared minus 9. Is this factored completely? Why not? Because the x squared minus 9 is the difference of two squares, right? So that will factor into x minus 3 and x plus 3. Very good. Now it's factored completely. All right, Parrish. Yay. Now we're going into special cubics. Special cubics. These are binomials, but they're going to be in the form of either a sum, if there's addition in between them, a sum of two cubes, or a difference of two cubes. If you have a sum or a difference of two cubes, you can factor these out. A sum of two cubes will factor into a binomial and a trinomial. The binomial is going to be the cube root of a cubed. So what's the cube root of a cubed? The cube root of a cubed is a. So it's going to be a. The cube root of b cubed is going to be b. And if it's an addition, if it's a sum of two cubes, we have to put a sum in between the two of them. For the trinomial, you're going to use that binomial to fill it out. You're going to square the first term, a squared. Square that last term, and any number squared is positive, so that's going to be plus b squared. And to fill out this middle term of the trinomial, you multiply them together, a times b, and you make the opposite of what that sign is. If this is a sum, this has to be minus ab. And for the difference of two cubes, we do it the same way. A difference of two cubes will factor into a binomial and a trinomial. What's the cube root of a cubed? A. What's the cube root of b cubed? B. What sign goes in the middle? Minus. If that's a difference of two cubes, this has to be a difference. Then the trinomial, you square the first, it'd be a squared. Square the last, it has to be plus, because any number squared must be positive. And here, to figure out the middle term, we multiply these together, a times b, And what sign in front of them? Plus. If he's a difference, then we have to make him the opposite sign. So before we practice the sum or difference of two cubes, we want to look at some perfect cubes. Here's some perfect cubes, and that's going to help us identify when we have a sum or a difference of two cubes. 1 cubed means 1 times 1 times 1. So 1 cubed is 1. 2 cubed means 2 times 2 times 2, which is 8. 3 cubed is 27. 4 cubed is 64, etc. There we go. So the sum or difference of two cubes. The first is the sum of two cubes. What's the cube root of 64? We just wrote it down on the previous page. 4. The square root of 64 is 8, but the cube root of 64 is 4. So this is a sum of two cubes. It will factor into a binomial and a trinomial. What's the cube root of 8 cubed? Cube root of 64. What sign goes in the middle? Plus. Now to fill out the trinomial, what's a squared? Oh, I said it. It's a squared. What's 4 squared? 16. It has to be plus because any number squared is going to be positive. And then our middle term, you multiply those two together. So that would be 4a, and what sign goes in front? Minus. It has to be opposite of the sign of the binomial. Next example. M cubed minus 125. That's a difference of two cubes. That will factor into a binomial and a trinomial. What's the cube root of m cubed? Cube root of 125? We wrote that down on the previous slide, 5. What sign goes in the middle? Minus. If it's a difference of two cubes, we have to put a minus in here. Now to fill out the trinomial, square the first. What's 5 squared? Positive 25 on the last. And what goes in the middle? Plus 5m. If it's a difference of two cubes, then he has to be plus in the middle term there. Now in case I run out of time,